If any of you are familiar with learning difficulties or know the research behind it, it tends to, especially things like dyslexia, dysgraphia, those kinds of learning challenges, learning disabilities, they tend to cluster in families, the research shows, especially among boys. And that's true, unfortunately and fortunately, in our family. Got a significant history. As I said, my dad was illiterate. I struggled with dyslexia. I didn't know how to read very well. I'll share later what reading was equated to. Both of my daughters in their early elementary years struggled with reading, and in fact, we sought outside help to get them help for reading. And my younger daughter, she definitely has dyslexia. It's kind of up in the air whether my older daughter does, but we've got a funny story to possibly confirm that. This is what I call 3 generations of dyslexia. None of us, this was on Christmas morning, and this beautiful Joy decor, my daughter made for me, my oldest daughter made for me for Christmas. And we spent probably a good share of the morning trying to figure out if this was right. None of us could figure it out, whether that J was correct. We thought it looked a little different, but then we're like, no, it's right. But then, no, it's not right. And so we laughed hysterically. It was the highlight of our Christmas morning. So we share, my daughters share struggles, not my older daughter, not anywhere near as much as my younger daughter, but, and then we go on to our grandbugs. Ari, as I said here, has been diagnosed with dyslexia. Caden is currently in speech therapy. He's our second grandbug, and he is currently being tested for dyslexia and dysgraphia, which it's pretty hands down, according to mommy and daddy who deal with it every day. I'm sure those in the audience know what that's like to deal with learning struggles with their children. And then our youngest grandbug, Callan, he is having speech difficulties just shy of 3. And he is currently being evaluated for speech difficulties, which is foundational for reading and writing difficulties, as Rita, I'm sure, will elaborate on throughout this time. But so it's definitely clustered in our family. However, despite that, I've always had a dream to go to college, but I just never thought, never believed that, 1, I had the smart genes to do that, and 2, I just wasn't college material, because my average grades in school, growing up all through school, was D's and F's. In fact, I graduated high school with a D-, having taken history twice to just get out of high school with a D-. And I look back on it and I'm thinking, I don't know how I ever got out of there, because I was just passed from one grade to another, and I honestly didn't. I didn't learn. I didn't learn a lot. So despite that, dreams come true, and here we are. I think it was back in 2014. There was a life transition that I experienced. My husband and I had led a healing ministry for people who suffer from, adults suffer from childhood sexual abuse. And if any of you have suffered from that, you know what it does to a marriage, you know what it does to a family. And so it's always been our passion to help people in that area. And in 2014, that ministry came to a screeching halt after 25 years. Due to a schism in that church that we were in, and it was a very sad time. But after recovering from that and really, seeking God on what do I do next, my daughters had a very loud voice in what to do next. One of the first things they said to me, this is the beauty of other people knowing your dreams. First thing they said to me is, "Mom, you can fulfill your dream. Go to college." And I'll never forget when they said that, because on one hand, there was just this streak of thrill that ran through me. And then on the other hand, I just wanted to throw up, because the thought of school just was nauseating to me. So But as I said, dreams come true, and here we are. I'm graduating in May with honors, and then I'll continue on in June with higher education, yet to get licensed in my counseling. So what I went to school for, because it's a passion of my heart, was to get a degree in psychology with a special focus in addiction and trauma. And having grown up in that and having overcome and being treated for addiction in my own life as a young mother and wife, I just have a lot of passion to help people about that, especially in recovering from the trauma of all that. I've mentioned the word trauma a couple times tonight, and sometimes that can really impact people in a negative way because we don't want anybody to experience trauma, especially our children. So when I say trauma, let me give you an operational definition for trauma and how we're going to be referring to it tonight, how we're going to be referring to learning struggles from a trauma perspective. The core complexity of trauma, according to Bessel van der Kolk, who's an expert on how trauma impacts the brain, he explains the core complexity of trauma as the inability to escape and utter helplessness. So I want you to keep that definition in mind tonight as we journey on through this next hour. It's the inability to escape and utter helplessness. So it doesn't have to be the death of a loved one, or, trauma doesn't register in us on the big T's. They're what we call little T's too. Environmental trauma, so to speak, is what psychology refers it to. And that can just be anything that causes us to feel like we cannot escape or puts us in a position of utter helplessness. Depending on the person and depending upon their thresholds, they can experience trauma in a situation like that. And it's important to understand and know that not everybody experiences trauma the same way.
And I just want to interrupt here for a minute, Joy. When you first said that to me, big T, little t trauma, that was like a light bulb for me, because I haven't quite been sure how to think about what I knew kids were going through who have learning struggles. And I just really like that way of looking at things, that it doesn't have to be the big T stuff, right?
Right. No,
and it is big it is big anyway, but we know what the real, it doesn't say compared to sexual abuse or something, which is certainly a big T, and I don't think anyone would disagree, but we do have these other traumas and they have impact.
Well, and I think something that's really important to say there too, Rita, is it's really, really hard to make a comparison with anything that's traumatic for anybody, simply from the standpoint of, when it comes to sexual abuse, a child enduring yelling from her parent could experience the level of trauma I did with sexual abuse. It just depends on people's thresholds and their origin, their physiological makeup, their chemical makeup, their environment, so it's really difficult to compare. We always advise people not to compare, simply from the standpoint of, if it was traumatic, it was traumatic, and we can't change that, whether it was being yelled at or whether it was enduring sexual abuse of any kind, or a car accident, or being rejected at school is a significant trauma for our kids. Mm-hmm. Being in school today can register as trauma due to the stress that it is in regards to our current situations with what's going down in the schools today. So studying how to treat addiction, today's research shows that we come at it from a neuroscientific view, addiction and trauma. And as I was studying the current neuroscience in regards to treating addiction and trauma, I really made some discoveries of my own on what happened to me as a child in the classroom, especially with my learning struggles and difficulties. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to share with you just a little bit of neuroscience, and I'm going to put up a diagram of the brain, and I want to encourage you not to become overwhelmed as we talk about the aspects of the brain and how our brain triggers a stress response when we feel that trauma, when we feel that inability to escape or that utter helplessness or any other kind of trauma that we might be experiencing. So I'm going to put that image of the brain up and just share a little bit about, I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible so that we can understand what actually happens in the brain. When someone experiences a threat or a stressful event, the amygdala there that you see circled in red, it's an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing. And that area of the brain, the amygdala, sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus, which acts like a command center in the brain. The hypothalamus communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system so that the person has the energy to fight or flee, whichever is necessary for the given situation. The autonomic nervous system was designed to control involuntary body functions like breathing and blood pressure and heartbeat and the dilation or constriction of blood vessels and airways and the lungs. And it has two components, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like a gas pedal in the car. It triggers the fight or flight response and provides the body with a burst of energy so that it can respond to the perceived threat or danger. The parasympathetic nervous system acts like a brake, and that promotes the rest and digest response, which calms the body down and returns it to homeostasis. When a threat is perceived, the amygdala sends a distress signal. The hypothalamus then activates the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, which in turn activates the adrenal glands to pump adrenaline into the blood system. As a result, the heart beats faster than normal, and it pushes blood into the muscles and the heart and other vital organs. The pulse rate and blood pressure go up, and a person starts to breathe more rapidly. They call it chest breathing in the place of crises. As the airways in the lung take in as much oxygen as it can so that the person can fight or flee, whichever they need to do in the given situation. So this process, it is so well designed that it actually begins in the brain even before the brain has a chance to visually process any tangible threat. That's why you hear of people who are able to jump out of the pathway of an oncoming car without even thinking about it, without even thinking about what they're doing. So hang in there with me. We're almost done with this piece. There's a second component to the stress response system, which the amygdala sets off. It's known as the HPA axis, which involves the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. And if this area of the brain continues to perceive a threat, it sends hormone signals to keep the gas pedal pressed down full throttle. And as a result, cortisol now dumps into the body, which keeps the body revved up and on high alert, okay? So as the threat passes then and the cortisol levels fall, the parasympathetic nervous system puts on the brake and it starts to calm the body down and everything returns to homeostasis. Okay, so let's look at that application if you'll follow me. I hope this follows well. I hope that example can help you understand what I'm about to share now. So in learning as a child, to the potential even, the potential to even be called on in school to read something out loud, which happens quite frequently for students, or to read that out loud and then to communicate to my teacher or classmates, whether it be verbally, whether it be on a test, whether it be on a homework sheet, to communicate what I just read absolutely terrified me. So, because I couldn't. One, I couldn't read, and two, I couldn't comprehend. The words would bounce on the page, and it was just really, really hard for me to read and learn to read. So just the thought of going to school became a trauma point for me. And then if I didn't answer the question correctly, as you all know, who have children in school, kids laugh at you. Unfortunately, the school that I went to, the teachers ridiculed me. And then when I get home with the D or the F, there comes a greater time of punishment. So it was kind of a double whammy at home. So it didn't take long for my brain to associate learning and reading with pain, with fear, with punishment. And, you know, they have this saying in psychology where I'm sure those of you who are psychology buffs have heard of this before. Neurons that fire together wire together. And what my brain did, actually, because I so often associated at a very developmental age, associated learning with fear and punishment, reading with fear and punishment, there were some neural pathways in my brain that were developed to make that equation. And so those neurons that fired together like that wired together. And I grew up not only fear, you know, having a great fear of learning and reading, especially in public or out loud. I grew up really honestly thinking that I was stupid, and that belief, that false belief, carried on into adulthood. And that was the challenge. That was the hurdle I had to, you know, when I said I wanted to throw up, the thought of going to school was still there at age 51. There are on page 3 stress responses of what fight, flight, flee, freeze looks like. And my survival techniques, as my amygdala went crazy and was constantly throwing off a stress response in school, because I was just deathly afraid that I was going to be called on for something and that I wouldn't know the answer. My response was the flight. And what I did was basically disassociate in my classroom. In fact, I would get in trouble so often for not paying attention. And not paying attention looked like Joy staring out the window of the classroom in a trance-like state. And so I would get yelled at a lot because I wasn't paying attention, and then the teacher would send home notes that I wasn't paying attention. But when I look back on that, that was a stress response. That was a flight. I couldn't bear to be existent in the classroom because it was such a threat and such a danger to me on an emotional level and on a physical level when I got home. So
can I interject here for a minute?
Absolutely.
So I was just telling Joy that, you know, a lot of you have expressed, and I see this in my students, sometimes we see a fight, which is, you know, yelling, no, I can't, I don't want to, I'm not going to, you can't make me, you know, a lot of that. Sometimes we see flee, like literally, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. Can I get up now? Can I go? Are we done? You know, I want to do this. Sometimes I will see freeze, and I haven't always recognized what that is, because I know that some children have a difficult time formulating what they want to say. So if they have difficulty with writing and dysgraphia, I had a tendency to think more about how they might be not writing when I asked them to, because of the language struggle of formulating a thought and how I could support that, but not really thinking that this could be freeze. That, you know, kind of inability almost to put something on the paper because of this, you know, trauma and this, you know, all of these chemicals flooding through. So that has been really important for me to be able to kind of separate out what each of these can look like, especially in relation to what some of you have shared with me.
I think we see those kinds of responses all the time at home and in the classroom, especially around homework, and I think this is not the acid test, but I think we can identify those stress responses when in one moment everything seems fine, and in the next moment, my gosh, a bomb just went off, and now, we've got a child in total meltdown. That can happen in the classroom or at home around homework. They could be thinking of what happens the next day and induce that stress response. And as we go through some of these things on how we can help students and children learn in a safer, if I could use that word, fashion, to where that stress response can maybe be identified or even halted on some level. I think it's really important to give yourselves some grace, okay? This is hard. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the skills to help my own girls. Thank God we had insight and wisdom to take them outside and get outside help, and that really helped both my girls. Both my girls are avid readers today, which doesn't always happen, but it can. Research shows that it can. It just depends on all that's involved in regards to the disability, whether there's other factors and variables that the child is experiencing. But I was a yeller. And as a young mom, and I didn't present a safe environment for my kids. I think probably both of my daughters could tell you that it was an environment that was threatening. And both of them have had to work through that in a counseling setting. And we continue to work through that as adult women now in regards to what happened back there. So I grew up with a yeller, and my mom was a yeller, and I was a yeller. And, times like this where we can get together in the comforts of our home and discuss these hard topics is where we can begin to make an impact and change, kind of put a stake in the ground and start making changes to where, our daughters can do it better and their daughters can do it better.
And I have to say, in our age group, I don't know one woman who couldn't list for you what she wishes she'd done differently.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's just we're not perfect. No one knows our faults more than our kids, except maybe our spouses, and your intense moments. They are seeing times when you're tired, times when you're frustrated. Yeah. They are not always, easy to deal with. And, so you feel a lot of guilt, but really, so much is about how we, regroup, we apologize, we ask for forgiveness, we move on, and we work through it, right? We work through what the issues are. So I spend a lot of time apologizing to my kids too, now that they're adults. And, I think, loving them and admitting your weaknesses in the moment is a valuable tool, So yeah, I had plenty of times I thought if the windows had been open, I would have been embarrassed for anyone to hear me. I definitely came from a family of yellers, and it was an easy response for me too. So
yeah, when you grow up in that, it becomes a natural response, and it's very unnatural not to yell. It feels very unnatural not to yell, but we can do it. We can learn how not to yell, and that's really important for our kiddos. So what I'd like to do, again, I can't stress enough that as we go through this next half, you must embrace grace. I wish that we wouldn't, Rita and I are at an age where hindsight is gold,
Well, and we're not being tested every day. Exactly. The bottom line is it's so much easier to be calmer now because I'm not raising young children anymore. And there is, of course, the hindsight of, they turned out okay, and, all that. So yeah, it is true. Learning to forgive yourself is the biggest thing.
Yeah. Forgive yourself, try again, start again. Even if you have to do that 15, 20, 25 times a day. Where we fail, where we really fail, is when we don't start again, where we don't try again. So I think that as Rita touched on it, one of the most powerful things is that you can do with your children is when you lose it, you own it and you take responsibility. There's so much that happens in just that act. You teach them how to take responsibility. There's a cleansing that happens. The relationship is stronger, often grows stronger from wounds like that. And then mommy or daddy humble themselves and let them know that mommy was wrong for raising their voice, and maybe even providing an explanation that would help your child understand why. Not so much to put anything on them. If it's appropriate to do so, yes. But it's really important to know that that they know when they weren't the fault. My younger daughter just recently discovered that she was not the result of my anger, and her body, when we had that conversation, her body literally shifted. Both my girls, they weren't the result of my anger. Recovering from addiction brings its own set of issues, and there were plenty of other stuff going on in my own life and in my husband's life and in our marriage at the time that we both were recovering. And unfortunately, we tend to take our anger out on people that they don't have anything to do with it. And my girls got the brunt of that. And so even at 30 years old, she was significantly impacted, and it received a lot of healing. And just hearing me say, you were not the reason that I was angry. And I, as an adult, was able to explain to her what was going on at the time.
And, I think thinking more in terms of anger than yelling, because, my husband's not a yeller. But when he's angry, it comes out in different ways. And a lot of times it could be around work or all that was going on. And then, it could be critical, that he could be critical, or he could be overly firm or stern. In some ways, my kids could respond more to that, just that tenseness in the room, maybe even then, in some ways, my yelling could seem more warm than the tenseness of, right, that anger. So the anger is a little bit maybe more what we deal with. How we tend to express it as a personality can be different. Some people withdraw when they're angry.
Right.
And that can be hard too. So I think that's a good thing that you differentiated a little bit anger from just yelling, right?
Right. So let's move on to what we can do to help our child regulate and perhaps, kind of steer off that stress response. I think it's important, to consider these 4 responses: the fight, flight, the flee, freeze responses, because the more that you can see that operating in your child, the more you can see the steps leading up to that. And we'll go through some exercises in a little bit to help stop that stress response in process. But just basics here, real basics. We kind of touched base on this, but I can't stress the importance of for children to regulate their emotions. They've got to be able to see that in mom and dad. Mom and dad, especially mom, they have to see you regulate your emotions. And I think all of us can attest that when we lose it, everybody loses it. And our children mirror what we model for them. It's often said that what we do what we do moderately is done in excess by our kiddos, and gosh, that's a true statement. So it's very important that you model self-regulation for your kiddos. I can't stress enough either that if that's a problem for you, I really encourage you to explore that with a professional. There's a reason why, that anger is manifesting for a reason, and your voice needs to be heard about something. But perhaps that anger is misdirected, and if you perhaps we're able to sit with a professional and process those emotions and the anger that comes up quickly. There's oftentimes a lot of gifts in doing that, a lot of maturity, a lot of growth that we can experience as adults. So I really encourage, can't stress enough, professional counseling is a must. Watch your child or your student's facial features and expressions. Watch their body language. Like I said, as you study your child and you start recognizing these stress responses, you'll start to see some of the steps leading up to it. A lot of times we're just so busy, sometimes preparing dinner and getting the kids ready for bed. I watch my oldest daughter, and it's just like, whoa, she's got 3 kiddos with learning disabilities, and it can be a challenge, all various ages, and it is a challenge for her, but she's a trooper, and she's one to humble herself before kids when she blows it. And I know that her kids appreciate that. I know Ari really appreciates that. Watch that you're not overwhelming or rushing them, especially with learning disabilities. It's really important. It's overwhelming anyway for us to learn, okay? The fact of getting my books out, it can be overwhelming. Even as an adult, I've just learned now how to shut those responses off as an adult since being in college. But learning with a disability is hard. It's just hard. The research will tell you it's hard. It's harder than a typical reader, a typical learner. So be careful that you're not doing too much information or transitioning too quickly. Transitions oftentimes are a big factor with learning disabilities. My daughter's really good about making a transition. She'll, say, hey, in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes, or use some kind of object that shows them this is what we're going to do in just a little bit. This is what we're going to switch to. That's crucial when learning disabilities are at play. Be careful not to rush them. It doesn't work. I'm sure that all of you can attest that it doesn't work when we're rushing our kids out the door in the morning. That usually...
Right. And, we talk about, trying to really engage in the activities in short spurts that are really the most productive, because when I always talk about burning up cognitive juice, like don't waste cognitive juice on that silly little thing. But what I hadn't thought about is you're really wasting emotional energy too, so that you want it to be shorter, sweeter with transition time, right? But not shorter, meaning because I rushed you, just shorter because I'm not going to make you sit here forever, right? It's that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting pieces that I feel like are pieces I needed to hear.
Yeah. Watch their arousal levels. If we are seeing whining, crying, something's going on, pay attention to those arousal levels. And if they are melting down, if we tip the pot and we melt down, if a child melts down, help calm them. And I think it's very important that we are prepared to stop whatever we're doing and help them calm down, because once that stress response kicks in, we're dealing with a physiological effect. We're no longer dealing with behavior. We're dealing with all systems go in the body. And that's hard to stop. In fact, Dr. Grandin, I don't know if any of you have heard of Temple Grandin. I recently attended one of her conferences, and she said that when that stress response fires, it usually takes a good 30 minutes for someone to calm down, for the body to return to a homeostasis, a calm state. But again, if the brain detects that threat still exists, it's going to stay, that little body is going to stay revved up, and then we're off to the races, and who knows when it's going to stop. So it's very important that you can stop what you're doing, recognize what's happening, recognize what's going on, and help that child or student calm themselves down, because they're kind of at the mercy of a whole bunch of chemicals at this point, if that makes sense. Okay?
Right. And you had demonstrated for me how to do that, and I thought that was so helpful for me to actually watch you do some of this. So maybe you can share that.
Absolutely. We're going to do some exercises. One of the things, before we do that, one of the things that I just am excited to report to you today is all the research, especially with this and how trauma impacts the brain. All the research points toward mindfulness. And when I say mindfulness, I want to encourage you not to be turned off on that, because an operational definition of mindfulness, I think I have that someplace here. It's on page 5 in your handout, is awareness that arises from paying attention in the present moment. And when you think of the fight, or when you think of the stress response, like I said, we're off to the races. We're not in the present moment. We're doing everything and anything to avoid the present moment. So there is tons of research out there, and this is one of the ways we treat addiction and trauma today on a clinical level, is through mindfulness. And what mindfulness does is that, especially mindful breathing is what we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, it puts the brake on the parasympathetic nervous system. So it stops, it kind of halts the stress response. And we're going to practice that because it's very, very fun to do. There's several key things here that you can do with your kiddos. We're going to implement those mindfulness practices. So one is the belly breathing. Like I said, when we're in crises mode, we're chest breathing. We're breathing in the chest. We're not breathing from the belly. And it's the belly breathing that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which puts the brake on the stress response, if I could say it that way. So there's other things that we can do too. When the child does calm down, let's just sit for a few minutes, seconds, if that's all it is. Perhaps you can just practice stillness and quiet with your child. Practice stillness and quiet with yourself. Physical exercise, you can implement frequent breaks that involve creative activities, physical activities. Rita was talking about that. My daughter has a trampoline in her backyard, and our oldest granddaughter does her spelling words on the trampoline. I've been down there to give Ari her spelling words while she's jumping. It's a great activity. Swinging, it's great family time to be able to engage on that level. Therapeutic movement. Simple yoga moves for the kids, and I have shared a resource on your handout by Britt Collins. She's got a wonderful book out, Yoga for Kids, as well as sensory parenting, that she includes therapeutic movement in. That's very, very calming. And then I think it's really important to say too that I'm not telling you what to do, but think about using what we're going to practice here in this next segment. Think about using breathing exercises in the place of timeout. Because when we send our child a timeout, we're wanting them to be quiet, we're wanting them to get control of themselves. But again, we have to remember that they're at the mercy of a dump of chemicals in their body. And so we need to actively engage with them to help them stop that release of cortisol, to stop that release of adrenaline in their bodies that are firing them up and keeping them on high alert. So let's I'll come back to page 4, but let's, if you've got the handout, let's go to page 5, and let's do some of these breathing exercises that we can do with the little ones. It is as simple, before we do some of these exercises, it is as simple as 3 deep breaths. I did this with Rita in Vegas, and it just simply goes like this. Right from your belly, hold. You can do that anywhere. It is better than a drug. It is better than a drug. You can do that anywhere. You can. I saw a video once with mom trying to take a break from the kids in the bathroom with the bathroom door locked, eating a piece of licorice or stuffing her face with licorice. But I would recommend that lock yourself in the bathroom and do some breathing exercises so that you can go out in somewhat of a level head, not in a stress response, and tackle those situations that are going on. So again, she's in the resources. There's a wonderful occupational therapist that I had the privilege of sitting under in a conference just recently. Her name is Britt Collins. She wrote Sensory Parenting. She's got several books at certain stages of sensory parenting, as well as the yoga for kids. And she's got a wonderful little exercise. And if you would indulge me, if you would try it with me, because you could do this with your kiddos. So it just simply involves holding up your hand, okay? And these are all marked out in your pamphlet. And we're going to do, this is called 5 mindful breaths. And so
sorry,
we're going to, so we're going to start right here at the base of your thumb. And we're going to take this finger and trace around our fingers. So when we trace up the finger, we're going to inhale. When we trace down the finger, we're going to exhale. So let's begin. And we're just going to go real slow to get a nice deep breath. Now, mind you, the kiddos, their diaphragm is not as big as ours, so you might not have to do those bigger breaths. So here we go. Inhale. So you can do that. I mean, you can call it, hey, turkey breath. Let's everybody raise their hand, and do a 5 mindful breath. You can do that anywhere. I actually did that with my husband the other day. I said, hey, babe, let's do a 5. And so we traced, and he was kind of giggling all throughout, but he got the message. You also can use a breathing ball with that same measure. This is what we call a breathing ball. You've seen these before. And what you can do is, again, it's really hard to, especially with little ones, when you say, let's breathe, what does that mean to a little one? But you can go like this. You can go inhale. Exhale. And they've got a big one like this. I think it goes about like this for adults. So if you wanted to get the fullness of your diaphragm as an adult, you could get the big one. But these are great for kids. They can inhale. It just gives them something visual to implement that mindful breathing. And it's fun. It's fun. It's colorful. The other one that we can do is what they call the breath, and that is just simply deeply inhaling through your nose, placing your tongue at the top of your roof and making that S sound, and then slowly extending that breath. So it goes like this. That is like one of the more relaxing ones to me because there's something tangible happening for me. Do you like that, Rita?
I'm going to try that to help me sleep at night.
Oh, yes. Yes. Those are great. Breathing exercise works great in the season of menopause when you're up in the night and can't get back to sleep. So the next one is a bumblebee breath. And that's just simply inhaling, piercing, kind of pressing your lips together very lightly, and letting breath out to where you're going to get kind of a hum, and your lips they should vibrate or tickle a little bit. So if you want to try that one with us, we're going to inhale. So again, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the sensory issues that I have or what it is, but those tangible where or the hum is just a really relaxing breath to me. And then the last one they call the volcano breath, which we just take a deep breath in, and then we're going to make a strong pushing all the air out of our belly in a ha sound. So it goes like this. And that, especially if you're frustrated, if you're angry, it's a very cleansing breath. Do that a couple, 3 times, and you can just rid the body of a lot of toxins that build up with that.
I just want to share with you a few comments here. One person commented that her 18-year-old walked in the middle of doing it, and he liked it so much he sat down and did it with her. So I thought you would appreciate that. And the other is one parent commented that she's been working on some of this, and she practiced these skills when her kids were calm.
Yeah.
So they weren't trying to learn them when they were already stressed out. So I thought that was worth sharing with you, some of those comments going on here.
That is a great idea. Oh my gosh, because the key here in not only getting them to do this as they're stressed, but we want to help them understand and feel that stress as it begins in their body and implement, so that when they've been trained by this, they will automatically begin to breathe. I'll share a real funny story. Britt Collins, the OT that I went to a conference with last week, she has showed a video of occupational therapy with a little girl, maybe, I bet you she wasn't even, I want to say about a year. She had Down syndrome. And Britt was teaching her how to breathe, and she had the breathing ball. And all she did with this little girl was 3 times. She would do once, and then it was her turn. And then she would let her do it, and she breathed, to model for this little girl. And then it was Britt's turn, and then it was the little girl's turn, and then it was Britt's turn. And by the 3rd time, the little girl breathed on her own. She just went... It was so cute. But I thought, wow, that was 3 times of training right there. And so we want to teach our kids at a very young age, and even into our adults, how to breathe.
So if you have one more thing to cover in 5 minutes, what would you like it to be? And then we'll go to questions. Then we'll go to our giveaway. Then we'll go to questions.
Honestly, Rita, we could, for those who are on the webinar, they have this information. There's some other techniques, some visuals for children.
Although I must say, it does help to see you do them.
Okay. These are pretty self-explanatory. Your little handheld mirror, breathe on the mirror and then let them write in it, the steam that's created. So just get the breathing going.
Oh, there's some good writing things.
Yeah, exactly. A cotton ball race. Deeply inhale and blow cotton balls across the table with a straw. I mean, that can be a game that can break the ice, and mom and dad can participate in that. Everybody can participate in that. Blow out candles. Light some candles. My youngest grandson loves blowing out candles. If we have a birthday, I think he thinks it's his birthday all the time, but he will blow out candles again and again and again and again. In fact, they've started to hide the candles in the house because he loves blowing out candles, but it's a great exercise to get them breathing. And then, of course, blowing bubbles is also a great idea. But there's all kinds of, I would encourage you to read through or there's other calming strategies that are listed out in your handout. So I encourage you to read through those
Now, without making us feel too guilty, can you just for a few minutes talk about the mom's role? I think we have mostly women here, and you had talked a little bit with me about the mom's role in helping kids learn how to regulate.
Yeah, research shows that children learn from maternal regulation. And so that, that puts some pressure on us. And again, I can't stress enough that if you have difficulty regulating your own emotion, that's worthy of exploring. But I want to encourage you, it's easy to walk away from a hard situation because what works one day might not work the next day. And I think that, according to Dr. Grandin, that's just the nature of learning disabilities. And I think it's very important that as moms, we're very open to trying something new all the time, again and again and again. Like I said, what worked yesterday or what's worked for the last week may no longer work, simply from the standpoint that we, as well as our kids, are constantly fluxing, we're constantly growing, we're emerging into new people every day, every moment. So I can't encourage you enough to try something new, try something different again and again and again. Troubleshoot, understand what could be tipping them off in their environment. Another good idea is just to perform a sensory. If it continues and you're having a really, a big battle, perform a sensory audit of your environment. Look at lighting, and especially with a learning disability. It's really important to stay away from fluorescent lights, sounds, buzzing lights, ticking clocks. Any of that can be extra stimulus that their brain is having to process that will tip them. Smells, of where they're studying, textures of objects that they're utilizing while learning, taste and texture of snack preferences, drinks. A lot of times with learning disabilities, there's sensory issues. Seating posture, your positions when learning, and then just other household activities. If it's a crazy environment, kids aren't going to learn, so and then one last thing, I think it's really important. This is a really easy one to remember, and perhaps some of you have heard of this, H.A.L.T. Avoid learning activities when children are hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Just any of those conditions for a child is not conducive to learning, and if we push them to learn in that environment, it's not good. We're not going to get good outcomes. I think we don't get good outcomes, do we? When we're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, as adults, we don't get good outcomes when we're under that kind of demand. So lastly, avoid any kind of negative learning experience. Again, I shared earlier how my brain associated learning with fear and punishment. And so if the learning environment is chaotic and crazy and they get in trouble and they get yelled at, if that happens consistently and consecutively, do your best to unwind that. And the beauty of neuroscience, it's called plasticity in our brain, is that we can create new neural pathways. We can, especially with mindfulness techniques, we can heal our brain and create new pathways. So I would say abort, halt negative learning experiences, and do what you can to associate learning with fun, with enjoyment, with positivity, anything like that.